From the Chesapeake Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental reporting, this is Chesapeake Uncharted, the podcast that uncovers stories about the Bay region, its interconnected ecosystem, and the people who rely on them. I'm Jeremy Cox. On today's episode...
When it gets hot, you mean that, like all the ambulance calls that we hear? I mean, that's because people are falling out because of the heat?
Ambulance like the one we're hearing now.
Ambulance like we're hearing now. And indeed, it's an ambulance.
I mean, you couldn't have planned it this way. I'm sitting at a picnic table in this little triangle of a park on Richmond's south side. Across from me are Rob Jones and Cherie Shannon, two community activists. Jones, the executive director of Groundwork RVA, a green group with a youth focus, is explaining the health consequences of a warming planet, how the added heat is not going to be distributed evenly and felt equally by everyone. Some areas will get hotter than others. Hotter because they're starting off already hotter. Right now, during a heat wave in Richmond, you can find a 16-degree difference between the coolest and hottest parts in the city. And the inhabitants of these hot zones, they're not some randomized sample of races and income levels. They are, by and large, black and in the middle class or below. For this segment of America, climate change isn't just an environmental emergency, it's a health emergency. The heat is making them sick.
In the black community, if you go back a generation or two, there's a phrase which is when downtown gets cold, uptown gets pneumonia, right? So yeah, everybody's going to feel it, but the impacts are going to be really different.
To put it plainly, as the climate changes, it could lead to more ambulance calls on the south side, like the one that Jones seemed to conjure as if out of thin air from our shared table. Now here's the really unsettling part. If you've been paying attention at all to the dialogue going on about race in America, this may not come as a surprise to you. Everything we've been talking about in Richmond, the way neighborhoods are divided by race, the way black communities are hotter and more prone to illness than others, it's all by design. If this is news to you, rest assured you're not alone. I was vaguely aware of the history of segregation in housing, but I really only thought about it in the overt sense. You know, like real estate agents steering black buyers away from white neighborhoods, or white owners refusing to sell to a black couple. But it turns out that it's all much more institutionalized than that. During this season of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're examining climate change. It's happening in the here and now, and not just at the North Pole and Antarctica. We're talking about here in the Chesapeake Bay region. With each episode, we're taking a closer look at one slice of this new reality. Think of it as a snapshot in time before things get worse, when we as a society can maybe still change the future. Today we'll explore how there ended up being two Richmonds, one relatively cool and the other blazingly hot. And we'll check in on how climate change is adding fuel to the fire. First, a quick break.
Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you in part by Greenfin Studio, offering marketing and communications services for a greener world. Their team combines strategy, creativity, and scientific insight, setting them apart when conservation, sustainability, and scientific organizations need help telling their stories. See what they can do for you at greenfinstudio.com.
Welcome back. On today's show, we're exploring a hot topic, how climate change is bringing the heat to communities that already have had enough of it. The The south side of Richmond is quite literally the region south of the James River. Most people put the eastern boundary of the south side at Interstate 95. The main thoroughfare is the Richmond Highway, until recently known as the Jefferson Davis Highway. It is the home of the tobacco giant Philip Morris USA, a massive Defense Department supply depot, and all manner of public housing. I wanted to know what it was like to grow up here, so Shannon got me in touch with one of her colleagues.
Hello, my name is Amy Wentz. I am a pretty much lifelong Southside resident of Richmond, Virginia. I did serve some time in the military and work in Northern Virginia for the military for a little while, but I found my way back to my roots here.
Wentz has this interesting outsider/insider's view of the South Side. Her biological mother is white and her father is black. She identifies as African American, but she was adopted by two white parents and raised in this semi-rural community right on the outer edge of the South Side. So she had the yard and the quiet streets and all that. And then she would visit her friends and encounter this world that was wholly different from her own.
You could feel the difference, you know what I mean? Like I was saying, as a child, right, to leave my neighborhood, go to a friend's birthday party in her neighborhood, and to be able to look around and say, wow, this is not the same. This is different. Like having that initial reaction, like, oh my gosh, people are living like this. You know what I mean? I remember them not having any grass in front of their house, just like patches of dirt. And then like the parking lots in the projects were real funky. But in my house, growing up where I lived, we could run to the backyard and run up the street, and we're riding our bikes through our different areas and exploring creeks and exploring waterways. And you know what I mean? When I go to her house, it's like, it just wasn't the same. And I felt that as a child.
To this day, the South Side has fewer trees and parks than other parts of town. On the ground, it looks like a lot of the industrial engines that power the economies of America's medium to large cities. We're talking weed-choked medians, unnecessarily wide asphalt boulevards, and parking. So much parking. The neighborhoods can be split into two main species: post-war single-family and public apartment complexes faced with so much brick that you could easily mistake them for armories. The common theme that emerges throughout the South Side is a lack of investment. America has had many bull markets since the 1950s, times when lenders loosened their grip just a little and money flowed into new subdivisions, movie theaters, and strip malls anchored by Whole Foods. But not here. This didn't happen by chance. Again, Cherie Shannon.
A group of folks sat down at the table and said, well, this is what we want our neighborhood to look like. And we don't want those folks here. We don't want black folks here. We don't want Latinos here.
You're talking about redlining.
I'm talking about redlining.
Redlining. Ever heard of it? Well, if you haven't, here's a short history lesson. Dateline, 1933. The Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation is tagged with helping homeowners acquire government-backed mortgages. Remember, it's the 1930s, and the New Deal is experimenting with ways to hoist the economy out of the Great Depression. The HOLC's primary aim is to purchase mortgages that are in default and provide better terms for borrowers. Now, you don't want to go throwing good money after bad, right? So, the HOLC examines neighborhoods in 239 U.S. cities and produces what it calls residential security maps. These produce a color-coded quick reference depicting where investments would be considered a safe bet, with categories increasing in risk farther down the scale. Neighborhoods receiving the highest grade, an A, are colored green on the map. At the low end, the neighborhoods in the D category are shaded in, you guessed it, red. Red as in, stop, do not lend to this family. Across the country, even outside the Jim Crow South, the effect of the policy was to steer money toward white people and away from black people. In Richmond, 10 of the 12 neighborhoods shaded in red were predominantly African American. Redlining was formally made illegal by the Fair Housing Act of 1968, but its impact can still be felt today, researchers say. About 3/4 of the neighborhoods graded as high risk or hazardous on those racist maps remain low to moderate income, according to the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, and nearly 2/3 remain minority neighborhoods. Richmond's South Side continues to bear the scars, Shannon says.
But you'll notice a lot of issues that happen to many communities that have been redlined. And so by that, we have abject poverty, there are residents who have lower incomes. There's just been a complete divestment of resources in the South Side. They were designed to fail.
The government-sanctioned practice of withholding investment in black neighborhoods appears to be tied to having fewer trees in parks, all the way up to today. A study by the U.S. Forest Service in 2020 analyzed the tree canopy in 37 different U.S. cities, finding that the canopy in formerly green-graded communities is 21 percentage points higher than in their red-line counterparts. The researchers theorized this had something to do with residents in red-line neighborhoods having smaller lot sizes, lower wages, and less access to the levers of political power. Redlining didn't create segregation, nor did it create inequality. It just codified them. To see its legacy, Shannon suggests, just look around Richmond.
You know, it's one thing to be on the north side and to be driving down the road. You have sidewalks, you have bike lanes, there's pedestrian safety, whereas over here, good luck trying to walk to the bus stop or trying to get to a grocery store, if there is a grocery store. So when we're talking about investments now, it's like, why are people in positions of power not making these decisions to actually invest in these neighborhoods? And it's still by choice, and it's still by design.
We've established that you can see redlining, but emerging research that began right here in Richmond shows you can feel it, too.
Okay, we're ready to go.
I called Jeremy Hoffman, chief scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia in Richmond. If you're a fan of citizen-assisted science and elegantly crafted research projects, these next few minutes are for you. This being the 21st century, I become acquainted with Hoffman from his Twitter feed, Jer_science. It's at once accessible and newsy. He's a great follow. Anyway, scholars have known for a long time that places with more concrete and less shade are hotter than those with less concrete and more shade.
When it's really, really hot outside, urban areas actually can amplify that really extreme heat even more so than it would be otherwise. This is called the urban heat island effect. Basically, any like man-made structures, things that are built out of like asphalt or brick or cement, they absorb more of the sun's energy throughout the day and then re-emit it back into the air as heat into the afternoon and evening. It actually raises the temperature of particular neighborhoods within cities more than others, especially if they're dominated by these like hard, impervious landscapes.
Hoffman sets out to map the precise locations of these heat islands in Richmond and to show just how dramatically different those variances are. First, he gathers his equipment. The centerpieces are these thermometers encased in PVC tubes that stick out above car windows.
You can think of them like a car flag for a sports team.
The idea is to collect a whole bunch of readings across the city during the same time periods. You can't do that alone, so Hoffman recruits dozens of volunteers to help capture temperature readings. The study involves 9 cars and 3 bicycles for those hard-to-reach places.
By sending a whole bunch of people out all at the same time, you get a really highly descriptive map of how temperatures change throughout these different time periods of the day.
They set a date for the data collection, July 13th, 2017, and lo and behold, nature complies with the city's first heat wave of the year. It hits 99 degrees at the Richmond International Airport that day. Meanwhile, this increasingly sweaty army of citizen scientists is taking readings during hour-long periods. one each at 6 a.m., 3 p.m., and 7 p.m. Afterward, Hoffman and his colleagues from Portland State University in Oregon, where much of this kind of research has been conducted, pair those on-the-ground readings with those gleaned by satellites. Using machine learning, their computers can create a citywide heat map. That allows the researchers to overlay their findings on a land use map to see whether their theories about the built environment amplifying the heat are going on in reality. If Hoffman and his colleagues were looking for a big headline number, they got it. A 16-degree difference between the coolest and warmest parts of the city, with the highest temperature recording hitting a steamy 103.1 degrees.
16 degrees Fahrenheit, that's pretty extreme, even in itself. That's sometimes more than the total amount of temperature change that a single place will see from the morning to the afternoon. So this is, very serious amplification of heat extremes based on the urban design of the city.
To no one's surprise, the data crunching confirms that neighborhoods dominated by concrete, like the South Side, are hotter.
It became clear really quickly that these areas that were experiencing much warmer temperatures during the heat wave were generally communities of color and kind of lower resourced parts of the city. And predominantly, of course, as we were suggesting, is like there's not a lot of trees and a lot of hard surfaces.
Hoffman and his colleagues have gone on to repeat the study in Baltimore and Washington, D.C., where the same patterns persist. Lots more heat in minority-majority neighborhoods. In each case, you could take the temperature, lay it over the old homeowners loan corporation maps, and the same neighborhoods would light up. A January 2020 study published in the journal Climate suggested that just such a link exists between the urban heat islands of today and the redline communities of yesteryear. Out of 108 urban areas nationwide, 94% demonstrated patterns of elevated temperatures with formerly redlined areas and lower temperatures in areas that escaped the red ink. On average, redlined areas were 2.6 degrees Celsius warmer than their green-lined counterparts.
Now add on top of that climate change.
Oh yeah, climate change. How could I forget? According to Climate Central, the number of days per year in Richmond with a heat index of at least 105 degrees is projected to increase from 13 days in 2000 to 61 by 2050. The group also estimates that the annual summer high temperature of 87 degrees will zoom up to 96 degrees by 2100, putting the city on par with current temperatures near the southern tip of Texas. Remember, heat is distributed unequally along economic and racial lines. So, places like the South Side will just get hotter.
And so the precarity of these neighborhoods is only amplified by climate change.
That extra heat has real consequences. We'll talk about that right after this break.
Hi, this is Laura Lutz, editor at the Chesapeake Bay Journal. I hope you're enjoying our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join the community of Bay Journal readers. If you care about climate change, wildlife, clean air, healthy communities, and of course the Bay and its rivers, you'll find news you can use at the Bay Journal, along with some great ideas for outdoor travel. Our subscriptions are free. Check us out at bayjournal.com and click on subscribe to start receiving the best independent environmental news in the Bay region.
Welcome back. On this episode of Chesapeake Uncharted, we've talked about how racist housing policies shaped cities like Richmond, Virginia, creating heat islands that disproportionately bake the city's most impoverished residents. As the climate continues to warm, the temperature isn't the only metric that will rise. Public health officials worry that the increased heat will make people in those communities sicker. Study after study shows strong connections between higher temperatures and increased incidence of heat stroke, dehydration, and heat-related heart attacks and strokes. A Natural Resources Defense Council study reports that the number of excess deaths on extremely hot days in Richmond averaged 6 per year from 1975 to 2010. Unless action is taken to significantly curtail greenhouse gas emissions, the death count is expected to jump to 100 by the last decade of this century. One of the most troubling heat-related illnesses is asthma. It can affect anyone of any age, but rates are higher among children. But Dr. Michael Schechter, a pediatric pulmonologist at Virginia Commonwealth University, told me that the city routinely ranks in the top 1 or 2 places in the country for asthma deaths. Here's why.
So this is a multifactorial issue. And yes, it's true that we have relatively high pollen counts in central Virginia, and allergies and pollens are important. But getting back to the social determinants that I'm talking about, we have amongst the highest poverty rates. Actually, we have a high murder rate here, and we have significant problems with housing security compared to elsewhere. And overall, the social safety net is really very porous. It's those poverty-related issues, the issues related to the long-standing racial disparities and treatment that's part of the history of the Southeast in particular. These are all things that are major contributors.
So here we have the deadly reality of climate change for urban-dwelling African Americans. Racial injustice contributed to the fact that they are suffering from greater heat right now. But it doesn't end there. Other kinds of racial injustice, manifesting as higher crime rates, poor access to health care, lower incomes, and more, are standing in their way. If people living downtown get a cold, they can see a doctor. If people uptown get pneumonia, they can also see a doctor, but only if they can find one, and then be able to afford the transportation, and then make that journey without fear of violence, and then be able to pay for that care once it's provided, and then. Again, Cherie Shannon.
I would like for us to talk about climate change from a very people-centered focus first. I would like for folks to not just say climate change is all these horrible things, it's an existential crisis, and then say, oh, and it's going to disproportionately impact Black or brown people. Like, we already have existing infrastructural and systemic issues that are impacting Black and brown people, and climate change is compounding that even more.
So what can be done to, if not reverse, then at least combat the lingering effects of redlining in a climate change world? Let's stay in Richmond, where one of the solutions has been right under our nose this whole time, the park where Shannon and Jones met me for our socially distanced interview.
We are at the Broad Rock Community Garden in South Richmond. It is an incredible space. We're surrounded by multiple garden beds. We have rain barrels with its own irrigation system. There's a pergola with picnic tables. And so really it's more than a community garden. It's a gathering space for people in this neighborhood to just come, sit, hang out, and enjoy some cool parts of nature.
Before its makeover, this park was technically a green space, but it wasn't an inviting space, Jones recalls.
It was a little pocket park. It was just here. But what you see was not here, right? There was no food growing, there was no green infrastructure, there was no place for us to come and sit if it was raining. It was just a little, green pocket corner.
More green, less gray. Since the quarter-acre community garden came into being a couple years ago, it has become the setting for cookouts and yoga sessions. But above all, the park is a respite from the heat, and it could be part of the solution if the investment that has been lacking for so long on the south side finally arrives. In 2020, Richmond Mayor LeVar Stoney used the community garden as a backdrop to announce plans to add 5 parks to the south side. The undertaking would expand the city's green space by 36 acres. The sites were selected based on a city-operated climate mapping tool called the RVA Green 2050 Climate Equity Index. Next solution, planting trees. If redlining caused fewer trees to be planted over the years, it's time to start digging some holes, right? That's the concept behind an initiative announced in the fall of 2020 that aims to supply the South Side with 650 new trees. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation is leading the project with the help of a $227,000 grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Relying once again on the Climate Equity Index, the nonprofit identified places most in need of green space. Jones's organization, Groundwork RVA, is one of the local partners on the project. Another partner is Southside Relief. That's leaf spelled like the leaf on a tree. That organization was founded by Shannon and Wentz to help South Richmond overcome its environmental disparities.
So it's not enough to say that we want to increase canopy cover across all of Richmond. No, we really have to say we want to increase canopy cover in areas where there are heat islands, where there's very few green spaces and access to nature.
For Shannon, it's about making her community whole. For several decades, redlining kept the South Side from reaching its full potential. Getting there will take more than planting trees and laying out more parks, Shannon admits. It took a long time for the community to get sick, and it will take a long time to get better. But as she sees it, adding greenery is the engine that will drive that revitalization forward.
Trees have a lot of ecological and economic benefits. They also have a lot of social benefits as well. And it's one of the simplest things that we can do that has a long-term and lasting impact for the environment and for our communities.
As you've probably guessed by now, these problems aren't unique to the South Side, nor are the solutions. In virtually every sizable American city, there is a South Side, a place where redlining kept black residents separate from their white neighbors and made their communities less attractive. Redlining may be officially over, but its legacy is echoed in modern development codes. Critics point to single-family zoning, for example, as a mechanism that reserves parts of a city for middle and upper-class dwellers, by making them unaffordable for lower-income buyers. Which brings us to one final solution.
A lot of this has to do with political power. And so we still have zoning ordinances and laws on the books that segregate our neighborhoods. We have to be able to leverage our community voices and say, this is what we want our neighborhoods to look like, and to be able to be in positions of power to make it happen.
Mary Finley Brooke is a professor of geography and the environment at the University of Richmond, who specializes in climate justice. Whether you're talking about a small island country endangered by sea level rise, or a historically black neighborhood in the American South, she explains, the future hinges on one thing: who has political power? She calls it procedural justice.
So people who are most impacted often feel like they don't have a voice. So there's a lot of ways that this happens, obviously, whether we're talking about international scales, national scales, state, local. But certainly many people feel like they don't have a voice. We have to think about voter disenfranchisements, whether it's corrupt politicians, whether it's the power of corporate lobbying. Why aren't the people who are most impacted actually getting to change what's happening to them?
Make noise. Be heard. Vote. All that democracy stuff. The cynical among us may scoff, and with good reason. But let's look back at Richmond. People like Cherie Shannon and Rob Jones are fed up, so they start organizing. Academics like Jeremy Hoffman take notice and lay the scholarly foundation to support those causes. Deep-pocketed groups like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation support the cause. The city's mayor builds a successful case before the public and the city council to build more parks. Problem solved. Chef's kiss emoji. Well, not quite problem solved. Richmond has a long way to go to solve its Rubik's Cube of environmental, health, and social problems. But for Amy Wentz, it's a challenge she wants to attack head-on. She ran for city council in 2020 to represent the 8th District, which includes the South Side. She lost the election, but when I talked to her a few weeks later, she said she was as committed as ever to fighting for a greener future. I asked her whether she is discouraged by climate change, how it will add another layer of difficulty to her quest.
I think that we, have shown throughout history that once we understand and know what a thing is, we can advocate for it. I think that it's just that there's been just a lack of education in these certain areas. People over here are suffering from just they have everyday needs, that everyday little emergencies that people don't survive. It's like survival, right? You're trying to make sure that you have food for your family for the next week. With the kids at home doing virtual learning, you're wanting to make sure that you're keeping your internet on. You're wanting to make sure that you have money to get the last little bit of gas to make sure that you get to work on time so that you're able to provide for your families. Like, people over here are suffering with just everyday survival. And so it's tough when folks are going through things like that for them to think outside of that. And so that's why we have to do the work of just making sure we're educating people that this is a part of our collective survival.
Part of our collective survival. Here on the South Side, addressing climate change really is a matter of life and death. The sirens are blaring.
And indeed, it's an ambulance.
Will people listen? Thanks to Greenfin Studio, which combines creativity and communication savvy with scientific insight. Visit greenfinstudio.com to see how they can help your organization engage a wider audience. Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you by the Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental news in the Chesapeake region. Production for this episode was by me, Jeremy Cox. The story was edited by Laura Lutz. Our marketing and advertising director is Jackie Kane. You can find more episodes of Chesapeake Uncharted on your favorite streaming service or at ChesapeakeUncharted.com. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for a free Bay Journal news subscription at bayjournal.com. Until next time, this has been Jeremy Cox. Take care.